She was just an ordinary black waitress in a small coffee shop in the middle of New Orleans. She was called Kayla. Every morning, she served a grumpy old man with gray hair, dressed simply but with a deep look in his eyes. She didn't know who he was, only that he usually sat at the last table, where the light coming through the glass windows seemed to protect him. Every day, Kayla brought him coffee, quietly listening to him talk about the good old days, about a big company, about the people he once trusted, and she just smiled, whispering, "As long as you still have faith, everything can start over." Then, one morning, he didn't come. Instead, 4 men in black suits walked into the shop, carrying a red-sealed envelope and a tall lawyer with cold eyes. They asked her, "Are you Kayla Monroe?" From that moment on, the life of the ordinary waitress took an unexpected turn. A journey through greed, lies, power, and finally, trust. Why did an old stranger choose to trust her? And what made a billion-dollar empire change just because of a woman who was once looked down upon? The answer lies in the following story. Please like and share before watching. To spread the story of kindness and faith in this challenging world, New Orleans in the early morning always has a very special beauty. Not as noisy as New York, nor as bustling as Los Angeles. Here, the sunlight filters through the old oak trees, falls on the old cobblestone streets, and reflects on the Mississippi River like an old mirror. The humid air and the smell of coffee blend together, creating a unique aroma that can only be found in the American South. Kayla Monroe rode her old bicycle down the dewy road. She had just finished her evening shift at the small bakery and was about to start her morning shift at the Morning Light Café. The black woman in her 30s looked casual in a white blouse and a pale blue apron. Her hair was tied back at the nape of her neck. Her eyes were dark but bright. She still smiled, though her hands were calloused from work. Her small apartment was just a few blocks away from the shop. Before leaving, she always stopped by her mother's bedroom. The frail old woman lay on the hospital bed, breathing softly through an oxygen tube. Kayla stroked her mother's silver hair and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I'm going to work. Mom, I'll be back soon." She nodded slightly and took her daughter's hand. In those cloudy eyes, there was still the loving look that Kayla carried with her all day. The Morning Light Café opened at 6. The doorbell jingled as Kayla entered, carrying the scent of damp air and mist. She turned on the lights, wiped down the table, and prepared the first pot of coffee. Steam rose from the water, mingling with the smell of freshly baked bread. She loved this moment, a moment of peace, before the world began to rush. At 10 to 7, the first regular customer walked in, Edward Harrison, a man with silver hair, a slight stoop, and an old gray tweed jacket. He always sat at a table by the window, where the light was just enough to illuminate his cup of black coffee without sugar. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." Kayla smiled. He nodded, his voice low and light as a breath of air. "Good morning, Miss Monroe. You look tired, a little, but fine. Do you still have your black coffee and toast?" "The usual." Kayla remembered his little habits. He always folded napkins into squares, cut bread slowly, and used his left hand because his right hand shook slightly. One day, when she helped him cut the bread, he laughed. "My hands are old. They're not steady anymore." She replied softly, "Age does not weaken you. It just makes you more delicate." Those mornings became routine. Mr. Harrison arrived at 7:15 and sat in the same spot. At 7:45, he left, always leaving a $2 tip in a folded napkin. Never more, never less. One day, when it rained heavily, he didn't show up. Kayla felt strangely empty, as if the shop had lost its rhythm. The next day, he returned, his hair wet, his jacket soaked. "I didn't want to miss your coffee," he said. Kayla laughed. "I think you like your coffee." He shook his head. "I like the way you make it." Their relationship was nothing grand, no status, no strings attached, just two people lost in the world, finding peace in a few short minutes each morning. Kayla never asked what he did for a living, nor was she curious about the faded gold ring on his finger. To her, he was just a kind guest, and to him, she was a rare kindness in the world. The sky over New Orleans was strange that morning. No sun, just gray clouds and steam drifting past the windows. Kayla wiped down the bar, glanced at her watch, 7:20. He must be late, she thought. But 7:30 passed, then 8, and still no sign of the familiar figure. At 8:47, the doorbell rang. Kayla turned around, expecting the elderly figure, but instead, 5 men in black suits walked in. The atmosphere in the bar suddenly became thick. The few customers fell silent, only the sound of shoes on the wooden floor. The leader was a middle-aged man, straight, with a stern face and bright eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. He carried a brown leather briefcase and wore a small lawyer's badge on his lapel. The other 4 were large, silent, like moving walls. Kayla stopped, the towel fallen to the ground. She swallowed, trying to smile, but her heart was pounding. The man approached, stopping at the bar. His voice was deep and clear. "Are you Kayla Monroe?" "Yes, that's me. I'm Raymond Cole, the Harrison family's legal representative. I need to speak to you privately about Mr. Edward Harrison." The name made Kayla's whole body sink. What happened, Mr. Cole bowed slightly. "Mr. Harrison passed away last night, and he left a message for you." In that moment, the coffee machine stopped, and the whole café fell silent. Kayla stood there, her hands shaking, her eyes fixed on the table by the window, where the sunlight still shone through, illuminating her empty coffee cup. The morning wind blew through the oak trees in front of the Morning Light Cafe, casting shadows on the mottled tile floor. Kayla sat quietly after her shift, her hands cradling her cold cup of coffee. The news of Mr. Harrison's death left her empty. He had gone so suddenly. Only yesterday, he had sat at the table by the window, saying that the coffee that day tasted like memories. She looked up through the window, where the sunlight still filtered through the clouds, shining on the old wooden table. There was still a streak of light on the tabletop, just like every morning when he sat there, reading the newspaper and smiling gently. That image brought her back 2 years ago, the day he first appeared in the shop. It was raining hard that day. New Orleans was drenched, a cold wind blowing through the windows. Kayla was mopping the floor when the door opened and a drenched, elderly man stumbled in. He said nothing, just put down his cane and sat in a corner near the fireplace. His long coat was soaked, and his gray hair stuck to his forehead. She quickly grabbed a towel to dry him. "Would you like me to bring you some warm water?" He smiled slightly. "Just black coffee, no sugar." She made him a cup of coffee and set it down on the table. As he took it with a shaking hand, a few drops of coffee fell onto the back of his wrinkled hand. Kayla handed him a tissue, and from then on, he came back every day. At first, he was quiet. He only asked short questions. "How long has this shop been open? Do you live nearby?" Then, gradually, he told more. That he used to be a design engineer, that his wife had died early, that his son lived far away, and that his house in the suburbs was too empty for an old man to live alone. Kayla had nothing to hide. She told him about her mother, about her night shifts, about her dream of opening her own little shop where she could make her own coffee. He listened, his eyes gentle, without a trace of pity. One late summer afternoon, he asked, "Have you ever thought that kindness can make people stronger?" She smiled and replied softly, "I just know that if I'm not kind, this world will get worse very quickly." He chuckled. "I believe you will go further than this coffee shop." From then on, they became closer. Some days he brought some old books, sometimes a local newspaper with odd news items. He never said who he was, nor did he talk about money. To Kayla, he was just an old customer with a warm heart. One time, when she stopped her car in front of the old motel, she saw him standing across the street, holding a paper bag. "I bought some more bread. You and Mom can eat it to ease your fatigue." She was surprised. "You don't have to do that." He just smiled, "I know, but I want to." Kayla rode him home that day on her bike, a distance of just under a mile. The night breeze blew his silver hair lightly. "I've forgotten this feeling for a long time," he said softly. "What feeling?" "The feeling of believing that someone still sees me as a human being." Those words made her remember forever. Time passed. Winter came and went. Mr. Harrison grew weaker, but he still came to the shop regularly. He sat at the same table every day, newspaper in hand, eyes still bright, though his body trembled. Every morning, when Kayla brought him coffee, he said, "Thank you. Kayla, you make me feel like I still have a place to go." Then, one morning, he didn't show up, for the first time in 2 years. She assumed he was sick, but by the third day she was starting to worry. She tried to find out where he was, but he never gave her his address. He just said, "I live near the river, somewhere quiet." A few days later, when he returned, she breathed a sigh of relief. He was thinner, walking slower. "You worried me." "I just went for a routine checkup," he said, but his voice was weak. Kayla smiled, put down her coffee cup, and said softly, "You should get more rest." He looked at her, his smile hidden behind deep wrinkles. "If I quit, who would listen to your stories every morning after that day?" Every time he left the shop, he always said something strange. "Don't change." Kayla didn't understand what he meant. She just thought he wanted her to keep smiling. Then, on that drizzly April day, she saw a small newspaper he had left on his desk. The headline read in bold, "Harrison Foods announces restructuring. Founder steps down for health reasons." She was startled. "This Harrison has the same name?" she asked, and he simply replied, "There are many people with the same name." She did not know that the simple man sitting in front of her was the owner of that corporation. That evening, she walked home through the dimly lit streets. The wind carried the smell of cinnamon rolls and the sound of distant jazz music. She thought of him, of his strange words, of the way he looked at her as if he were telling her something. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast for her mother, the radio crackled to life, broadcasting the morning news. Harrison Foods founder Edward Harrison has been hospitalized with a heart attack. She paused, her heart aching, but then told herself it could just be a coincidence. And then, a week later, he came back weaker, but still smiling. He put a $2 bill on the counter like every day and whispered, "If I can't make it, will you save this table for me?" She nodded. "Whenever you want to come back, it's yours." He gently squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Kayla. You have no idea how much you helped an old man believe in people again. The last time they met, he brought her an old leather notebook. Don't open it now. Keep it for when you need it." She laughed, thinking he was joking. But when lawyer Raymond Cole showed up with 4 strange men, the words echoed in her head with terrifying clarity. His name still rings in the air, like the last streak of morning light, Edward Harrison. She looked out at the empty table where he had sat. The coffee cup, now a thin steam, quietly dissipating in the pale light of the New Orleans morning. That afternoon, New Orleans was a gray place. The sky was heavy with rain, and the wind from the river carried a chilly mist. Kayla sat on a bench in front of the glass building where attorney Raymond Cole worked, clutching a worn canvas bag. She still didn't understand why she had been invited here, why 5 men in black suits had shown up at the bar that morning and said that Mr. Edward Harrison left a message for her. People were hurrying past the building, sharp suits, shiny shoes, and cold, rapid-fire phone calls. Kayla looked at them, feeling out of place. Her thin coat and worn shoes made her look small in this shiny world. When Mr. Cole stepped out, his voice was warm. "Thank you for coming, Miss Monroe. I understand this is unexpected, but please calm down." Kayla nodded and said softly, "I still don't understand why I'm here. Mr. Harrison is just a regular customer. You'll understand soon enough," said Mr. Cole, motioning for her to follow. The hallway led to a large conference room with a green carpet and classical paintings on the walls. A group of people were already seated inside a woman in a luxurious black dress with her platinum hair tied up in a bun, a middle-aged man with an arrogant face, and a slender young woman with sharp eyes. They all turned when Kayla entered. "Who is this, Mr. Cole?" the woman asked immediately, her voice cold. "She is Kayla Monroe," Mr. Cole replied, "a person named in Mr. Edward Harrison's will." The air suddenly became heavy. The man narrowed his eyes, a sneer curling his lips. "Surely another servant my father took pity on." Kayla lowered her head, feeling their gazes like cold needles piercing her skin. The woman, Margaret Harrison, set her teacup down on the table, the clatter as light as a knife. "I hope we can get this over with quickly. I have a board meeting at 3. Mr. Cole opened his briefcase and took out a thick file. "Yes, Mrs. Harrison. I will read the will in due course." His voice echoed evenly in the quiet room. Only the sound of rain pattering outside the window could be heard. "I, Edward Harrison, being of sound mind, do hereby voluntarily make this last will and testament." Margaret sat upright, her eyes unfocused, perhaps thinking this was just a formality to confirm her sure inheritance. The man, Charles Harrison, his son, folded his arms, leaned back in his chair, his attitude arrogant. The young girl, Olivia, typed on her phone, not bothering to look up. Kayla listened, her heart pounding. "I leave to Margaret Harrison the ownership of the Lakeview Mansion and personal assets with subsidiary accounts. To Charles Harrison, all his stock in the St. Louis Bank." Charles nodded smugly. "And give my niece, Olivia Harrison, control of her own investment fund and $3 million in cash." No one was surprised, but then Mr. Cole stopped. His voice was low, clear, the final part of the will, regarding Harrison Foods Corporation. The room suddenly fell silent. Margaret looked up, her eyes expectant. "Mr. Edward Harrison has decided to transfer all of his founding shares, along with the right to operate Harrison Foods Corporation, to Ms. Kayla Monroe. No one breathes. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair sliding back, hitting the wall with a dry clang. Who did you say, mister? Cole kept his voice calm. Kayla Monroe. Charles laughed derisively. Impossible, a waitress. He's crazy. Kayla stood frozen, their words echoing in her head like an echo in an empty room. She didn't understand, didn't believe, didn't know what to say. I think you misread it. Margaret stepped forward, her voice hard. Edward would never do anything so foolish. I'm afraid he thought it through. Mr. Cole opened the file again, pulling out the yellow envelope. He left a personal letter for Miss Monroe and a recording. Margaret grabbed the envelope, but Mr. Cole quickly held it back. Excuse me, ma'am, this is Miss Monroe's legal property. Kayla took the envelope, her hands shaking. Inside was a note written in a familiar, shaky handwriting. Kayla, thank you for not looking at me like I'm useless. Thank you for the mornings you smiled at, for the warm cups of coffee, for asking if I was okay when no one else would. I leave you what I built with my own 2 hands, not for reward, but because I trust you will hold it with a heart the world has forgotten. Edward Harrison. When she reached the last line, Kayla's eyes welled up. She clutched the paper tightly, trying to hold back tears. Meanwhile, Margaret screamed, No, it's a plot. This girl tricked him. Charles slammed his hand on the table. We will sue Who Is She to take my father's company. Kayla took a step back, feeling the room shrink around her. Mr. Cole's voice was calm. The will was probated by the court and 2 independent witnesses. All the legal formalities were completed before Mr. Harrison passed away. Margaret tightened her grip on her bag, her eyes red. You don't know who you're dealing with, Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Cole said slowly. Mr. Edward knows exactly what he's doing. There was a long silence. Then Olivia, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. If that's what Grandpa meant, then maybe he had his reasons. Margaret turned and shouted, Shut up! Kayla said nothing, just looked at the large painting on the wall, a portrait of a young Edward Harrison. In the dim light, the eyes in the painting seemed to look at her, calm and trusting. Mr. Cole put away the file and whispered to Kayla, You can come back to the shop if you need time to think. But, as of today, you are officially the legal successor of Harrison Foods. I don't know if I have the strength, she replied softly. You don't need the strength. Mr. Cole looked at her, his voice slow. Mr. Harrison believes in you because you have the heart this company lacks. As Kayla stepped out of the building, it began to rain. Tiny drops of rain fell on the pavement, shattering like glass. She looked up at the heavy clouds, her heart in turmoil. Behind the glass door, Margaret and Charles were still standing there, their eyes filled with hatred. As for her, in the cold rain, she could see only one thing. Clearly, her life had changed forever. Her mother, who was waiting for her at home, had no idea that her daughter, the humble street corner waitress, was now the master of an empire. But Kayla felt a weight on her heart, not because of power, but because she feared she would not be able to keep the trust Mr. Harrison had placed in her. She opened the canvas bag and took out the old leather notebook he had given her. The cover was worn, and there was a faint smell of rain-soaked leather. She turned to the first page. There was a simple line: "True power lies not in what you have, but in how you use it to change something for the better." Kayla closed the book, the rain mingling with her tears. She knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, Kayla woke later than usual. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, illuminating the small room where everything was as simple as ever: the iron bed, the wooden desk, the old framed photo of her and her mother. Everything was peaceful, except her mind. She still couldn't believe that she was the rightful heir to a billion-dollar food conglomerate. The phone rang. It was Mr. Raymond Cole. "Miss Monroe, I just wanted to remind you that you have a meeting with the Harrison Foods Board of Directors this afternoon. I'll be accompanying you." Kayla was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I don't know what they'll think when they see me." "Mr. Cole said softly, "What they'll think doesn't matter. What matters is that you know why you're there." She looked back at Mr. Harrison's old leather notebook, turning to the words: "True power lies not in what you have, but in how you use it to change something for the better." That statement calmed her. In the afternoon, Mr. Cole's car stopped in front of Harrison Foods, the massive headquarters in the heart of New Orleans. The golden H logo reflected the sunlight like a cold power. Kayla took a deep breath and stepped out. Inside, the large lobby sparkled with glass, and employees in suits moved quickly, their faces cold and focused. She felt smaller than ever. 24th floor, main conference room. When Kayla entered, all eyes were on her. The board of directors were seated in a long row at the table. Margaret and Charles were there, along with a few board members. The atmosphere was heavy, as if everyone had agreed to keep quiet. A gray-haired man spoke first, his voice dry. "Hello, Ms. Monroe. We have heard about this situation. I am Richard Bell, chairman of the board. Would you like to say anything?" Kayla stood up straight, her voice still shaking. "I have no ambitions. I just know that Mr. Harrison trusted me, and I want to understand why." A sneer came from Charles. "It's simple. My father was so lonely that he was ruled by his emotions. You don't know anything about management or business?" Kayla looked at him, her eyes calm and uncontested. "You may be right. I don't know much about business, but I do know how to respect people." A few people in the room looked up slightly, as if surprised by that calm but firm tone. Mr. Cole interjected. "Miss Monroe did not come to fight for power. She came to carry out Mr. Edwards' last wish to reform Harrison Foods in a more humane way, focusing on human values instead of just profits." Margaret said coldly, "Humanity doesn't pay dividends to shareholders. Mr. Cole." "Maybe not immediately," Kayla said, "but in the long run, it's the way to survive. I've seen people work 14-hour days in factories just to earn a living wage. I've stood in that hot kitchen." The room was silent. Richard looked at Kayla for a long time, then asked, "You mean you understand the people on the lower floors better than us?" Kayla nodded slightly. "Not better. I was just there. I know the feeling of being treated like a number." The air seemed to sink. Margaret glanced at her, her eyes sharp. "We can't let someone like that take over. I'm going to ask the court to review the validity of the will. You have every right to do so." "Mr. Cole replied immediately, "but I trust the court will uphold the decision." Margaret stood up and gathered her bag. "We will see who wins. She and her son left the room, leaving a heavy void behind them. Richard sighed, then turned to Kayla. Harrison was a determined man, but also full of secrets. I don't know what he saw in you, but if you really want to go forward, prepare for a fight. Kayla replied, her eyes deep and calm. I don't want to fight. I just want to do what he wants. The meeting ended, and Kayla stood looking out the window on the 24th floor. The city below was changing in the twilight, its light reflecting off the old roofs where she used to live. A strange feeling crept into her heart, half fear, half pride. Mr. Cole approached, handing her a thin file. This is what Mr. Edward has prepared in advance. He has a specific plan, and you are the only one he trusts to complete it. Kayla opened it and saw handwritten on the front page, Project Phoenix, restoring Harrison Foods to its roots. Below were small notes: restore the trust of workers, restructure with kindness. She clutched the file. He knew there would be resistance. Yes, said Mr. Cole, but he also knew there was no one else who could have done it but you. That night, Kayla returned to the small apartment. Her mother was still lying there, her face peaceful in sleep. Kayla sat beside her, telling her everything, as if she could still hear. Mom, I don't know if I can do it, but I'm going to try. Because he believes in me, and because I believe that kindness still matters. The sound of cars on the street echoed, fading into the night. She looked out the window. The city was gradually lit up with yellow lights, like small dots of fire lighting up the road ahead. The next morning, when she returned to Harrison Foods, the receptionist greeted her with a shy smile. Hello, Ms. Monroe. They're waiting for you on the 19th floor. The elevator doors closed, and Kayla took a deep breath. Today, she would meet the department heads, the people who actually ran the company. When the doors opened, dozens of eyes turned to her, some curious, some suspicious, some contemptuous. A large, brown-skinned man stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm Benjamin Clark, the production manager. Mr. Harrison told me about you. I never expected to see you again. Kayla shook his hand and replied softly, I never expected to either. He nodded and said softly, If he trusts you, I'll also hear what you're up to. That statement warmed Kayla's heart. Perhaps, in the darkness of power, there were still people who truly wanted to preserve what was good. As she stood in front of the planner hanging on the wall, Mr. Harrison's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes, people just need someone to believe they still have value. She smiled slightly. Though she had no idea where she would begin, she knew one thing clearly. This journey was not to seize power, but to give the company back its soul. Outside, the morning light shone through the glass window, illuminating her face. She was no longer the lonely waitress in the small café. She was stepping into the world of powerful people, but with a heart that could still vibrate with a warm cup of coffee and a genuine smile. 2 weeks into her tenure, Kayla began to understand that Harrison Foods was more than just a food empire. It was a maze of power and intrigue. Everything that seemed bright on the outside hid a dark side, shady contracts, manipulated financial statements, and people willing to turn on each other to keep their jobs. She worked from morning till night, studying documents, reading every line of Mr. Edward's notes in Project Phoenix. Each page filled her with both respect and fear. Respect for his vision. Fear because the people he had warned against were still in the company. Late one evening, with only a single light on in the office. Kayla heard the door creak open. It was Benjamin Clark, the quiet production manager she had met earlier. He placed a file on the desk, his eyes heavy. "You should see this," he whispered. "I found it in the internal archives." Kayla opened it, and inside was a copy of the freight contract signed under the name Margaret Harrison. The small print at the bottom sent a shiver down her spine. "Receiving company, Whitmore Distributors, Cayman Islands. This is a money laundering company," Benjamin said quietly. "I suspect they were moving hundreds of thousands of dollars through here every quarter in the form of transportation fees. I mentioned this to Mr. Edward, but he said he needed more solid evidence. Then he died before he could do anything." Kayla looked at the paper, her fingers tightening. "Thank you. Keep this a secret. If they find out, you'll be in danger." Benjamin nodded, his voice low. "I know, but if you want to save the company, you have to clear this up." She came home late that night. The light was still on in the small apartment her mother hadn't gone to sleep yet. She sat knitting, smiling when her daughter came in. "Are you working late again?" "Yes. Mom, I'm trying to understand what others have tried to hide," she said softly. "As long as you don't lose yourself." The words made her stop. That was what she feared most, that power would swallow her, as it had swallowed so many others. The next day, rumors began to spread around the company. Some said Kayla was about to fire a bunch of senior executives. Others said she was planning to sell the company. Every whisper was a stab in the arm. Margaret was definitely behind it all. At the weekly meeting, Margaret appeared with Charles, sitting in the front row. She crossed her arms and looked at Kayla with a contemptuous smile. "I hear you're investigating the internal workings of your company," Kayla replied calmly. "I'm just clearing up any ambiguities." "You think you're qualified to understand financial statements," Margaret sneered. "You used to serve coffee, not run a business." Kayla didn't reply. She just opened her laptop, showed the document Benjamin had given her, and said slowly, "So explain this contract to me. Why does Whitmore Distributors receive millions of dollars every quarter when there are no recorded orders?" The room fell silent. Margaret paled slightly, but quickly regained her composure. "I don't know where you got that. This is an old story. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with you." Kayla's voice dropped. "This is the company's money, the sweat of thousands of employees. I can't ignore it." Charles jumped up. "Are you accusing my mother?" "No." Kayla replied, "I'm just asking. If there's nothing wrong, everything will clear up." After the meeting, Kayla was called into Richard Bell's private office. He sighed, his voice slow. "Miss Monroe, you're walking a very thin line. You're touching too many things that other people don't want touched. I know, but if I'm afraid, I'm not worthy of Mr. Harrison's trust." Richard looked at her, his eyes both sympathetic and worried. "I don't want you crushed by this system. You're different, and that's why they'll want to take you down." That night, she received an anonymous call. A hoarse male voice said, "If you continue investigating, you will lose more than you think. Stop while you still have time." She held the phone for a long time, then hung up, her eyes cold as iron. The next morning, Benjamin walked into her office with a grim expression. The internal database was wiped clean. All the contracts, emails gone. Kayla stood up. "They're wiping their tracks, and they know you have a copy." Another evening, As Kayla left the office, two strange men followed. She picked up her pace, her palms sweating. As she reached the corner, one of them called out, "Miss Monroe, someone wants to talk to you." She didn't turn around, just sprinted into the crowd, her heart pounding. She headed straight for Mr. Cole's house. He opened the door, surprised. "What's going on?" "They're watching me. I think Margaret knows I have a copy of the document." Mr. Cole thought for a moment, then said, "I'll move it to a safe place. You'll have to leave New Orleans for a few days." "No." Kayla shook her head. "I'm not going to hide. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone else who works honestly in that company." She looked at Mr. Cole, her eyes unusually steady. "If they want to play dirty, I'll play it with the truth." 3 days later, the New Orleans papers ran the headline, "Harrison Foods Under New Management. Comprehensive Audit Begins." The company was in an uproar. Employees were talking, some fearfully, but many were relieved. For the first time in years, someone was telling the truth. In the office, Benjamin chuckled when he saw Kayla post the official notice on the bulletin board. "Did you know you just blew up a storm I know?" she replied. "But sometimes a storm is the only thing that washes away the dirt." That night, she went home and sat in front of the window watching the rain fall. She felt both scared and relieved. It seemed like Mr. Edward was still watching her somewhere. She remembered his voice and those words, "Kindness is not weak. It is just more patient than those who are in a hurry." She said softly to herself, "I will not back down, sir." Outside, the sound of rain mixed with distant jazz music, like the low notes of a changing city. And in that small apartment, Kayla Monroe, the waitress from years ago, was at the center of a storm that even she did not expect. 3 weeks after the audit, the atmosphere at Harrison Foods headquarters was heavier than ever. People moved cautiously, their eyes wary. News of the internal investigation had spread throughout the company, keeping many senior employees up at night. As for Kayla, she still went to the office as usual, calmly making coffee, chatting lightly with everyone, but in her heart, she knew the real storm was still waiting. One Monday morning, she got a call from Benjamin. "You have to come to the control room right away. They're calling an emergency meeting. Margaret is back." Kayla held her breath for a few seconds, then said softly, "I'll be there." The 24th floor conference room was packed. Margaret sat at the head of the table, flanked by Charles and a few major shareholders. On the other side were Kayla, Raymond Cole, and Benjamin. The atmosphere was tense. Margaret smiled coldly as Kayla entered. "Welcome, Miss Monroe. I have to be honest, you've kept everyone busier than ever." Kayla sat down and replied calmly, "If the truth keeps anyone busy, maybe they should reconsider how they do things." A murmur arose. Margaret leaned in. "Are you referring to me? I don't need any, ma'am," Kayla replied. "I'm just doing my job." Mr. Richard Bell tapped his hand on the table. "Enough. We are here to solve problems, not argue." Margaret glanced at him, then signaled for her assistant to bring out a thick stack of documents. "I have the independent audit report in my hands, and according to it," she put the file down on the table, "we have discovered many unaccounted expenses during the time of Ms. Monroe." The whole room gasped. Kayla was stunned when Charles laughed. "Do you think you are the only one who knows how to play tricks?" Kayla picked up the file and flipped through it. The charges were listed with electronic signatures her name, but she had never signed any of the transfers. This is a forgery. Do you have proof? Margaret asked sarcastically. Because the numbers are all verified in the system. Benjamin stood up, his voice harsh. Impossible, I am in charge of production. All payment orders go through me first. This is a lie. Margaret tilted her head. So you're involved too, Mr. Clark. Benjamin blushed and clenched his fists. I've worked here for 20 years and have never stolen a penny. Richard interjected, Enough. I want an independent investigation team to look into this. Margaret coldly said, No need. The commercial court has already accepted our lawsuit. If Kayla Monroe is truly innocent, she will have a chance to prove it. Kayla raised her head and looked straight at her. You want to drag me down to protect your sins? Right. Margaret shrugged. I just want justice, just like you. The air in the room was suffocating. Raymond Cole looked at Kayla, his eyes signaling her to stay calm. He knew this was only the first step in the plan to overthrow her. After the meeting, Kayla sat in her office, the afternoon sun beating down on her tired face. Raymond walked in and placed a small USB drive on the table. I thought you might want to look at this. One of the IT guys sent me a copy of the old security system. It contains data that was deleted before you started the audit. Kayla looked at him, her eyes shining with hope. What's in it? It could be the key to proving your innocence. She plugged in the USB drive. The screen displayed a series of files labeled W Distribution Contracts. Each file contained anonymous transaction data, and the signature read Margaret Harrison. Kayla exhaled. Here's the proof. Mr. Harrison warned about Whitmore Distributors. Now I know why. Raymond nodded. We need to get this out before they can turn around. No. Kayla shook her head. I want to do it the right way. Right in front of the entire board and the media. 3 days later, Harrison Foods held a major press conference originally proposed by Margaret to explain the lawsuit and the media crisis. But Kayla had been quietly preparing the opposite. The conference room was filled with reporters, cameras focused on the podium. Margaret stepped forward, smiling confidently. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison Foods has recently been tainted by false information. Today, we would like to clarify. Her voice cut off as Kayla stepped forward, holding a thin file and a USB drive. Excuse me, Mrs. Harrison. I think everyone should hear this before you continue. The room fell silent. Kayla plugged the USB into the projector. The contracts appeared on the screen. The electronic signature clearly visible, Margaret Harrison, authorized executive. Kayla's voice rang out, calm but firm. These are documents that were deleted from Harrison Food Systems 3 months ago. They prove that millions of dollars were transferred to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Whitmore Distributors. All transactions were approved by Margaret Harrison. Margaret paled and quickly shouted, You're making this up. Those documents could have been altered. No. Raymond interrupted. This is the original, extracted from the company's old secure server. It has a valid digital signature and an unalterable timestamp. A murmur of dismay filled the room. Several reporters stood up and started snapping pictures. Kayla continued, her voice choked but firm. Edward Harrison saw this coming. He believed that greed and dishonesty were killing the company. He believed that the only way to save it was to bring the truth to light. Margaret took a step back, trying to regain her composure. You think you won? You're just a pawn. No one will believe you. Kayla looked straight at her, her eyes calm. Maybe they don't believe today. But the truth doesn't need anyone to believe it to exist. The sentence made the room fall silent. A second later, the sound of the camera started again, more urgent than before. That afternoon, the news was all over the TV channel's CEO, Kayla Monroe, exposes Harrison Foods' financial scandal. Former Vice President Margaret Harrison suspected of money laundering. As the media stormed, Kayla sat in her office, looking out the window at the city. She didn't feel triumphant, just empty. She knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. Margaret wouldn't give up, and neither would those behind her. Raymond stepped in and put his hand on her shoulder. "You did what few people would do," Kayla replied softly. "It wasn't because I was brave. It was because I didn't want to disappoint Mr. Edward." He looked at her, a slight smile appearing on his face. "He would be proud of you." Outside, the sun sets behind the skyscrapers. The lights of New Orleans are on, and people are still bustling about. And, in the midst of that rhythm, a black woman, once just an anonymous waitress, is now standing firm in the eye of the storm, holding on to the most precious thing, faith. 3 days after the press conference, the media exploded. The evening news showed Margaret Harrison leaving the headquarters surrounded by reporters. The questions were so overwhelming. Do you plead guilty? Did you transfer money to the Cayman Islands? She staggered, her face pale. As for Kayla, she was the focus of all the newspapers. The New Orleans Chronicle ran a big headline from café waitress to CEO exposing corruption, the story of Kayla Monroe. People were talking, many admiring, but also some were cynical. She must have had a part in it. She read a few comments and put the phone down. The truth was out, but public opinion was never a fair place. The next morning, the board meeting was held. Margaret was absent. She had been suspended. Charles appeared, looking tired but still defiant. Richard Bell began. "We have received official notice from the court. The investigation will be expanded, and Miss Monroe will temporarily take full control until the case is concluded." Kayla looked around. The eyes of the people in the room were different now. No longer contempt, only wariness and respect. She stood up, her voice calm but firm. "I don't consider this a victory. It's a reminder that we've let greed rule us for too long. I don't want this company to be built on fear. I want it to be built on faith." A few people nodded slightly. Benjamin smiled. Raymond looked at her with pride. After the meeting, Kayla went to Mr. Edward's old office. His picture was still there, neatly placed on the wooden desk. She sat down and said softly, "I did it, sir, but it cost me." She opened the drawer. Inside was a thick envelope she had never seen before. It simply read, "For those who keep their promises." She opened it, and there were handwritten letters in Mr. Edward's familiar, shaky handwriting. "Kayla, if you're reading this, the truth has been revealed. You will see that the world is not forgiving of kindness, but do not let it harden your heart. When others choose power, choose dignity. You will not be alone, for others like you will seek you out." Tears fell onto the page. For the first time in weeks, Kayla allowed herself to cry. In the afternoon, Benjamin came in with another envelope in his hand. "I just got word from the court. Margaret and Charles are being held for questioning. But there's still a big problem. There's someone behind the scenes giving them money. An investor named Douglas Klein." Kayla frowned. "The guy who worked with Harrison Foods 10 years ago? Yes, he's back, trying to buy shares cheaply during the turmoil." She was silent for a few seconds, then said, We will not let him turn this company into a tool. I want to see him." 2 days later, in the luxurious office on the top floor of the Lafayette Hotel, Kayla faced Douglas Klein, a man with silver hair, an expensive suit, and a cold smile. "You are remarkable," he said. "I must admit you did better than I thought. I don't need compliments. I just want to know why you stood behind Margaret." Klein shrugged. "It's simple. I hate Edward Harrison. He fired me from Harrison Foods that year because he thought I was unethical in business. I just want to take back what is mine." "And you chose to destroy it?" Kayla asked, her eyes cold. Klein smiled faintly. "Destroy it and rebuild it my way." She stood up, her voice firm. "You're wrong. You can't rebuild something built on greed. Harrison Foods doesn't belong to you, nor does it belong to me. It belongs to the people who live off it." Klein stared at her, then laughed. "You're really naive. But I like naive people who dare to challenge." She replied softly, "Naive is not scary. Only those who no longer believe in good things are scary." She left, leaving behind the man clenching his fists in anger. That evening, Kayla returned home. Her mother sat by the door, her eyes warm. "I saw the TV," she said. "They said you were the black heroine of Harrison Foods." Kayla laughed. "I'm not a hero. Mom, I just try not to be a coward." Her mother took her hand and said softly, "Do you know why Mr. Harrison believes in you? Because you never forget to be a human being, no matter where you stand." That night, Kayla couldn't sleep. She thought back to the Morning Light Café, where it all began. She went there the next morning and ordered a cup of black coffee the way Edward liked it. The owner was surprised. "You still drink this? Most people order mocha or latte." She laughed. "Black coffee reminds me of where I came from." She looked out the window, where sunlight streamed through the panes. Mr. Edward's old desk was still there, as if he had just gotten up to go somewhere. In the afternoon, she returned to the company. Richard Bell was waiting in the conference room. "We need to discuss a new direction," he said. "The shareholders want to know how we're going to restore our image." Kayla opened her laptop and presented the plan she'd been working on all week. The headline on the screen read, "Phoenix, Reborn from Trust." She presented slowly, one idea at a time. Increase basic wages for factory workers. Build a scholarship fund for employees' children. Apply a policy of financial transparency and quarterly disclosure. Reopening the community table program, providing free food to the poor in New Orleans. When she finished, the room fell silent. Then Richard nodded first, followed by Benjamin. Several other directors looked at each other, then applauded. Richard stood up and said softly, "Mr. Edward once said, if someone has the courage to turn this company back into a human company, Harrison Foods will live another 100 years." Maybe he was right. Kayla smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. That evening, she received an email from an employee at the Baton Rouge plant. "Thank you, Ms. Monroe. I was afraid of being fired when the scandal broke. Now I believe there is hope for this company." She read the line over and over again, then typed back softly, "Thank you. We will do it again together, just like Mr. Edward wanted." Outside, the city lights came on. The buildings reflected their light on the Mississippi River. Kayla stood by the window, holding a cup of black coffee, staring into the distance. She thought about it, all the scornful words, the scared nights, the times she wanted to give up, and she knew it was those days that made her strong. Edward's deep voice echoed in memory kindness. Kayla is not a gift. It is a choice, and the one who holds it in the world is truly strong. She smiled slightly. Yes, sir, I will keep it. A month after the Phoenix Rebirth by Faith plan was implemented, Harrison Foods began a miraculous recovery. Factories that had been quiet due to reduced hours were now lit up at night. Workers were laughing and talking, and food trucks were back on the roads of the South. But Kayla knew every storm leaves an aftershock, and this one was named Douglas Klein. He didn't disappear like she thought. Despite being turned down for the investment, Klein quietly bought back shares through subsidiaries and indirectly became the third largest shareholder of Harrison Foods. The news reached Kayla one evening when Benjamin hurried into the office. "You have to see this." He put the financial newspaper down on the table. The headline on it, "Douglas Klein, back in the market, invests in Harrison Foods through International Investment Fund." Kayla skimmed it, her brows furrowed. "He doesn't give up." Benjamin nodded. "And I fear he's preparing for his next move." She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the distant lights of the city. Once again, the darkness returned. This time, not with guns or threats, but with power and money, the most sophisticated weapons of the upper class. "We're not going to let him control the company that way," she said. "I want to find out who he's buying through." Raymond Cole, with his extensive legal experience, immediately stepped in. He discovered that Klein had used a fund called Blue River Holdings, based in Delaware, and the representative on paper was Charles Harrison. The news was like a cold knife. Charles, who was under investigation and should have been banned from trading, was again involved. Both Margaret and Klein had been prosecuted, but somehow they still had people in the dark. "What are they going to do?" Kayla asked. "If Klein has more than 25% of the shares," Raymond replied, "he can force the board to vote out the CEO. He's got enough. Then I'll go ahead," Kayla said firmly. "If he wants the company with money, I'll get it back with trust." The next day, she sent a handwritten letter to all the employees, from the cleaners to the drivers to the middle managers. It contained just a few lines. "Harrison Foods doesn't belong to the strong. It belongs to those who choose to stand when everything else falls apart. Thank you for still being here. I promise I won't let anyone take that away from me." The letter spread on the intranet. Then, in the newspapers, Harrison's stock rose slightly again. But more important was the morale of the people. They began to believe in this young leader, believing that for the first time the company had a CEO who spoke not in the language of power, but in the language of people. 3 days later, Klein publicly invited Kayla to meet in New York. The meeting was heralded by the media as an economic match. The conference room was on the 72nd floor of a glass building. Kayla walked in, dressed in a simple black suit. Klein was already seated, with 2 lawyers standing behind him. He smiled. "You really know how to get the country talking, but don't think that's enough to fight me." Kayla sat down, her eyes calm. "I'm not fighting you. I'm just defending the thing you're trying to turn into a tool." "Tool?" Klein sneered. "This company is built on money, not emotions. But people make money, sir," Kayla replied, "and you've long forgotten that." He narrowed his eyes. "You think a few touching words can save Harrison Foods? I have lawyers. I have shareholders. I have the media." Kayla looked straight at him. "And I have the truth." She placed a file in front of him, a copy of the documents she and Raymond had obtained from the Justice Department. It detailed Klein's illegal investments in a series of companies that manipulated the market. Klein's face changed. Where did you get this? The same place you hid it, the system, she replied. But unlike you, I don't use it to destroy others. He stood up abruptly, his voice harsh. What do you want? Kayla said calmly. Get out, today, or I will send these documents to the press. You will lose not only Harrison Foods, but the reputation you have built over the past 40 years. Klein looked at her for a long time, then laughed dryly. Just like Edward Harrison. He used to talk to me like that, and he was right, Kayla said softly, and I just continued that. An hour later, Klein signed the withdrawal documents. As he left the room, the door closed with a click, the sound of an era ending. A few days later, Kayla returned to New Orleans. In the main lobby of Harrison Foods, she stood before the Wall of Honor, where pictures of people who had been with the company for more than 30 years hung. Now, among the old, gentle faces, was Edward, his smile as gentle as ever. Benjamin walked in, holding a copy of the new financial report. We made our first post-crisis profit, he said excitedly. Kayla smiled. It's not just profit. It's proof that trust can be profitable. That evening, Harrison Foods held a small ceremony for new and old employees. The auditorium was lit with yellow lights and jazz music. Kayla stepped onto the stage and looked out at the hundreds of waiting faces. Not long ago, I was just a waitress who was looked down upon because of the color of my skin, because of where I came from. But there was one person who saw me, not because I was good, but because he believed that I would not betray my own goodness. Today, I want to say to all of you, believe that every person has value. No need for power, just a strong enough heart. There was thunderous applause. Benjamin and Richard stood up. Raymond nodded slightly. After the ceremony, she left the hall and went out onto the terrace. The night air was cool, overlooking the glittering city. Raymond came over and handed her a cup of black coffee. Black coffee, as usual, he said. She smiled. Thanks. I'll probably never get over this. He looked at her for a moment and said, Kayla, you know, Mr. Edward once told me that if one day you could find the light amidst the rubble, Harrison Foods would truly be saved. And do you think I have? Raymond smiled. No, I think you are that light. Kayla was silent, looking up at the sky. Among the thin clouds, the North Star shone brightly. The guiding star she had heard Mr. Edward speak of, she whispered, Mr. Edward, I kept my promise. In the distance, the city of New Orleans still bustles. In the darkness, the lights of the Harrison Foods building shine brightly as an affirmation that, in a world full of calculations, kindness and perseverance can still prevail. And the story of the Black Waitress has become a symbol of hope, not only for a company, but for people who have been considered small in this life, in a world that often rewards ambition over kindness. Kayla Monroe's story reminds us of something timeless, that integrity is the only wealth no one can steal. She was just a waitress, serving coffee to an old man who saw in her what the world often overlooks: honesty, empathy, and quiet strength. When life tested her with power, lies, and betrayal, Kayla didn't fight with anger. She stood with grace. She proved that leadership isn't about control. It's about conscience, and that even the smallest act of decency, a cup of coffee, A gentle word can ripple far beyond what we imagine. To the older hearts among us who've weathered their own storms, this story is a warm reminder. It's never too late to do what's right. Every day is a chance to choose kindness over bitterness, truth over comfort, and courage over silence. Because sometimes the people who change the world don't wear suits or own companies, they just refuse to let the world harden them. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep stories like Kayla's alive, stories that remind us that goodness still exists, and it still wins.